gentlemen, excellencies, today we gathered here for a discussion about how the labor market policies applied in Nordic countries in the welfare states could be applied in Lithuania. What lessons we could learn? And firstly, I will ask the host to give a short introduction and invitation for the guests. Myself, I will say a few words afterwards. So firstly, I will ask Romas Lazutka just to say a hello. Hello. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, Professor Kvistas, I would first of all like to thank our partners who are very active, and this discussion is yet another evidence of this quite an active project that we started several months ago. The idea of which is to discuss Nordic state models, which are quite popular in Lithuania. They are being debated by our political leaders. They are being commented. They have been discussed quite a lot in the Progress Council in recent years, and a lot of features from these Nordic models are proposed here in the public debate in Lithuania, including some features of labor market policies, and the concept of flexicurity probably is the most popular, especially if we talk about Denmark. It has been also discussed by European Commission in a number of its documents and recommendations within the Lisbon strategy framework, and later EU 2020 strategy within the open method of coordination as a good practice example to be adopted by other EU member states. I hope that our guest will also discuss a bit reflecting on flexicurity, even though I know that in his presentation he does not use this term, but I think some things that he will discuss are directly linked to this welfare model, which is particularly prominent in Denmark. The main purpose, however, is not only to discuss what is functioning and what could be seen as best practices in the Nordic countries, but also what could be adopted in Lithuania, for which we have to debate what are the conditions which make certain elements of public policies possible in Nordic countries. We talked before, when we had a guest from Sweden, Professor Rothstein, we discussed quality of governance, we discussed similar issues, and of course when we try to transfer some practices from other countries into Lithuania, we have to be aware of our institutional environment. Shadow economy, which is quite big, significant share of people unwilling to pay taxes, quality of governance, which is lower than in Nordic countries at least. So how to take into account these features of our political and economic system, and I hope that commentators who will follow with their comments after the presentation will link what will be presented as labor market policies in Nordic welfare states by our guest with Lithuanian realities. I especially would like to thank our guest today, Professor Jonas Kvistas, who is from Denmark, as you see, from the Center of Welfare State Research, Department of Political Science, University of Southern Denmark. And of course, thanks go to Danish ambassador and the Nordic Council of Ministers, other Nordic countries, embassies, and to people who are behind some of these institutions, some of these driving forces of these debates. It's Jurgita from the Prime Minister's office, who is the engine of this project there, and my colleague Liutauras from our institute, who is working with Nordic Baltic public policies, and I'm very happy that their ideas, their efforts are bringing to fruit these debates, and I wish you all to take something interesting, something useful from this evening's debate as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll talk a lot today about the passive and active labor market policies. We could probably also theorize about the active or passive moderator. So, saving your time, today I will try to assume the role of passive moderator and not talk myself, not to try to have an opinion on every point, but instead give the floor to the experts and to the great speakers. And the next I would like to ask the Director of the Nordic Council of Ministers Office in Lithuania, Mr. Bo Harald Tilberg, to say a few words to us.
Well, right. Thank you very much, moderator. Well, of course, also for me, a most heartfelt welcome to everyone, distinguished guests, partners, and ambassador. So this is the fifth of the discussion events that we organize in the framework of Open Progress Forum and during the project Welfare State Model, Nordic experiences and perspectives for Lithuania. We started up with Nordic welfare state history. We moved to family policy, and from there to welfare technologies, and then to culture and welfare. So now turn has come to labor market policies. And of course it's most certainly an interesting topic, and a topic which is on the agenda in the Nordic countries, and very much so for the current chairmanship of my organization, the Nordic Council of Ministers. That is, unemployment is in the focus. So, why do we do this together with our partners? Of course, as has been said already, we would like to investigate what is the current status of a Nordic welfare state, what is functioning, and what are the challenges we definitely are facing today. And that, of course, in order to be able to disseminate good ideas to our neighbors. For our office, Nordic Council of Ministers office, this is really a relevant project. Our current guidelines state that one of our aims is to bridge the welfare gap between our regions. This will be a long-term process, but at least to share some of what we think are the best practices of discussing, I think that's really a relevant idea. We could, of course, this could not be done without solid partners, as the Nordic embassies in Lithuania. And of course, today I would like to mention the Danish embassy, the Embassy of Denmark, is kind of hosting a reception today. All the other Nordic embassies, which have helped out in many ways, supported events and speakers. Of course, Kaunas Institute of Technology, the host institution today, of course, first and foremost, my gratitude for making this possible. I can also very much subscribe to Ramuna's, thanks to Jurgita and Liutauras, very active and great partners make make things happen here. So, I don't know what should I say anything further? I think this might be enough, actually. I
Thank you.
Maybe. Well, yes, no, I will. I think I will stop here, and as the moderator said, leave a word to experts. I think that's a really good idea. But thank you, Professor Kvistas, for coming here today, and thanks to all our partners. Thanks to our guests coming every event. So now, Ambassador Molde would like to give information.
Just practical, yeah.
Practical information.
Okay. Permit me also to thank the organizers of today's event and the whole project. I think it's an extremely good initiative. I would just say that our modest contribution to today's event is that I will be hosting a small reception at home. So for those of you who stay until the bitter end and were interested in such a small reception, I will guide the way to my residence, which is not really a residence. It's not very big. I moved from Turnesges, where I used to live next to the president, and into a smaller place here in Detroit, much nicer actually, but much smaller also. Maybe you cannot all be in the living room, but then some of you will have to stay in the kitchen, and the kitchen is also a very nice room. So, okay, so when we finish the academic part, I will follow you in front to my place. You can stay there for a while, for those of you who want to have start a wine academy and talk to colleague friends. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Sounds very cozy indeed. So we'll move to our key presentation. Just to give a little background that has not been mentioned so far. We have Lithuania 2030 International Progress Strategy in Lithuania, and we're looking for ways how to actually implement it, for practical tools, how to achieve the ambitious goals that actually set in Lithuania 2030 strategy. And this is already a third open progress forum where society is invited to discuss the opportunities. And this is the fifth event of this, and the last event of this third progress forum. And specifically today we're going to be discussing a very painful area, labor market policies, where despite Lithuanians' impressive achievements in going up the ranks in doing business, problems of welfare state, a class of citizens that already is used to social benefits, to preferring social benefits to actual employment, without being an actual welfare state yet. So this is the outlook where we are probably today, a position with high structural unemployment, with possible further increases in structural unemployment in the near future, thus very low flexibility seemingly in the labor market, and at the same time looking just to our neighboring Nordic countries, we have the hope we can fix it. So here today, Professor Jonas Kvistas from Denmark is going to help us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Can you hear me? Is this better? Yes. Hello, my name is Jon. I'm from the Center for Welfare State Research at the University of Southern Denmark. I'm here because I'm at the moment traveling. Around trying to sell the Nordic model to other countries. So I'm participating in an expert working group in Scotland. You know, they are having a vote of independence next year. And for that purpose, the Scottish government has set down a group of experts to come up with a proposal for a whole new social model that can help the Scottish government to sell it to their population. So in other words, there is now increasing interest in the Nordic model from a variety of different places. So the Scots are interested, seemingly some of you may be interested, and they are also interested in the European Commission. As you may know, they are having big problems of legitimacy, of having popular support. So in order to try to regain some of their popularity, they're trying to say that the European Union should have a social dimension, and in this connection they are launching what is called an investment strategy, which has a lot of similar traits as those that have already been tried out in the Nordic countries. So this is really nice for me to go abroad and talk about the Nordic model. It's particularly nice because the politicians back home, they don't want to hear about it, okay? So, in other words, you should know that it's not always everybody that think the Nordic model is a popular idea and that it's sustainable. So I will try to tell you both a sales talk, but also pinpoint you to some of the challenges that we are facing at the moment, where you may want to learn from us so you don't have to repeat the mistakes that we have done. I can do this. Great. So you should have seen the mail I got as an invitation to come and talk here. I was going to talk about everything, okay? Gender, youth, aging populations. There was not a problem that I was not going to address. And it was under the title of labor market policies. I didn't even got the whole welfare state. I only got the labor policies to solve all these problems. And that's, of course, a little bit difficult. And I thought to myself, well, that would be a very black and white picture if I'm going to cover all these areas. So I decided to make a black and white presentation, okay? So it will be literally black and white, and there will also be a lot of reservations that I will not make in my talk in order to cover as much ground as possible. And I hope we can take up some of these issues in the discussion that follows. So first, I would like to say a little bit about the Nordic model and labor market policies. Then I will go into more detail with two of the type of policies that are employed, namely active policies and passive policies. And then afterwards, put it together and then come with some concluding remarks. This is a bumblebee. As you know, some of our colleagues in the natural sciences have found out that the bumblebee cannot fly. It is too heavy and its wings are too small for it to pass the laws of aerodynamics. Many people, they resemble the Nordic welfare model with the bumblebee. They say that it's too big and that it doesn't accrue enough money with the small wings that it has, okay? The bumblebee flies on, and so far, the Nordic welfare model has also been able to resist one challenge after the other, okay? So it has survived the oil crisis of the 1970s with crowding out hypothesis. It has survived the oil crisis of the 1980s, where there was also a discussion of whether the model contributed to stagflation. It has survived with bruises in Finland and Sweden, but it did survive the 1990s, and some would even argue that it was helpful for Finland and Sweden to get back onto their feet after their crisis disappeared. And now, in the 2010s, is that what we call them? We've had the financial crisis the last few years, and the Nordic countries have not been doing too badly. So in other words, it looks like we have a bumblebee that can survive in even very adverse climates. How can it survive? We basically don't know, okay? So therefore, the Nordic Council of Ministers, not in this context, but another context, sat down two Nordic networks of excellence with 100 researchers from political science and sociology and economics in one, and another one with historians, philosophers, and whatever, trying to figure out what is it that is particular about the Nordic model, how is it going, how is it reforming, can we still say that we have one model, or is it, as some of our historian colleagues say, that we have one model with 5 different versions of it. So some of us were set down to try to distill the knowledge we got from 100 academics. I can see that a lot of you are also academics, and you know what happens when you put 100 academics into one room. Very difficult to get consensus, okay? But I think we did actually manage to get consensus in this changing social equality, which is trying to look at the Nordic welfare model and how it is doing now in the 21st century. A small handful of us went on the initiative of the Matti Ahtisaari Center in Helsinki to try to distill the essence in 30 pages only about the Nordic model, so that the Finns could go and promote this model to other parts of the world. So that's a recipe for a better life, no less. A Dane would never say that immodestly. And then we have been doing some work on trying to see how is it going in Europe. Are there signs that they are going in a more Nordic direction, or are they going in a totally different directions? So my focus today will be mainly on the Nordic countries. After, if the Nordic countries cannot have a Nordic model, then it's highly unlikely that anybody else can have it, okay? But of course, the issue of whether you can import some of the ideas, I'm no expert on that. That I will leave to you to decide. So, the bumblebee is not alone. We also have a fly and a dragonfly, okay? The fly here is symbolizing the German model. It is catering very well for the insiders in the labor market. It has a lot of people in employment. I don't know if you can see the speed, but it's moving much faster than the other ones here. It's doing pretty well in economic terms. It has all other problems. It has problems of gender inequalities, of people on the margins of the labor market to get a solid stronghold into the labor market again. The dragonfly up in the left-hand corner is symbolizing the Anglo-Saxon model. It is not as encompassing as the other ones. It is smaller. It has bigger wings. It is, some would say, lean and mean compared to the two other ones. In the Nordic model, supposedly, benefits are given on the basis of citizenship, of whether you have become entitled by living in a country or not. In the spy version here, you get benefits according to what you have achieved by being in the labor market primarily. And in the dragonfly, everybody is for oneself, although there is a platform for the whole population. These are what we call ideal types, okay? In reality, all countries have mixtures from all different models. But it's just to sort of say that overall you can distinguish between these three models, and then a lot of countries have hybrids. Now, I managed to write down a whole presentation without mentioning the word of flexicurity, as was nicely pointed out. That's because I got the task of only talking about labor market policies. But for a starter, I cannot help but say that it's very important to place these labor market policies into a wider context. And the wider context is giving on how easy or difficult it is to fire people. That's what we normally call employment protection. It is placed in the context of social security. So how easy is it to get access to benefits? How generous are they? And for how long can you receive the benefits? That's what we find under social security. Active labor market policies I will deal with in a second. It's about what support do people get in order to re-enter the labor market when they have gotten kids, when they have got unemployed, sick, in different instances. And then finally, social services is the very important part of the welfare state, which deals with caring of elderly, caring of children, which allows people to reconcile work and family life, and therefore is key to understand the labor markets in the Nordic countries, because they have facilitated high employment amongst women, but also a gender-segmented labor market. So if you take the Nordic countries and then it's very easy to fire people, okay? I cannot be fired easily, but most people can be fired easily. But most people are not so afraid of losing their jobs, because they know that they can get access to unemployment insurance benefits relatively easily. That those benefits are relatively generous and paid out for a relatively long period. This is the talk 2 years ago. A lot of things have changed recently, but for the sake of the arguments, let's say that it's relatively generous social security system we have. Active labor market policies help those who cannot find work into work, and then social services, as I said, is key. So no employment protection legislation worth mentioning. The Danish employment protection legislation is on the same level as in the Anglo-Saxon countries, but then big on all the other three aspects. In contrast, we see a lot of our Southern European colleagues in the EU suffering dramatically because they have built up a model which is based on employment protection legislation, that it is your job that is secure. It's not the social security or of getting a job somewhere else that is secure. It's in the job you get the security. So when they have reforms at the moment, deregulating their labor markets, they are crying out loud, even the youngsters, even though that they are discriminated, because they're not putting anything else in place of these employment protection legislation. Then for the insiders, you have good social security, but it's not very good for the outsiders because they are not having this strong foot in the labor market. And then we say that the extent of active labor market policies is limited, and that the extent of care for elderly and family members, other children in particular, is also limited because we have a value here that is institutionalized of letting the family take care of its own people. So that's the Central European model, and the final one I need not introduce. That's on the other side of the Atlantic, so it's hardly European. But that's in the US where there's not much of anything of these four dimensions. So the flexicurity model is, in a Danish perspective, consisting of four elements, and not only flexibility and security, but actually also active labor market policies and social services. These are really key to understand the Nordic model and the Danish flexicurity model. I hope you know this guy. It's Robin Hood. So, as you know, Robin Hood was taking from the rich and giving to the poor. Some people think that this is the essence of the Nordic model. This is not the case, okay? Remember your Robin Hood? Where did he live? In Sherwood? Is Sherwood in the Nordic countries? No, it is not. It's in Britain, okay? So in the Dragonfly model, in the Anglo-Saxon model, you have a situation where you get something if you're really destitute, if the market cannot take care of you, and if your family cannot take care of you. That's called vertical redistribution, that you take from the rich and give to the poor. The Nordic model has not this as its aim, okay? The aim of the Nordic model is to prevent people from becoming poor, prevent them from being in need of money from the rich, to maximize the human potential of the whole population. So I'm sure that some of you will ask me, but isn't it very expensive? And can you pay so much in taxes? And why do you do it? And why don't you have the informal economy that we heard was perhaps an issue here? Let me tell you, it's because we are actually paying to ourselves, okay? This is a generation at point T. Some are children and youth, some are of working age, and some are retired. So those of working age are financing the well-being in terms of childcare, elderly care, and what have you, at any given point in time. And they do that, perhaps not with a smile, but they do that because they expect at a later stage to be the ones that are benefiting, okay? In other words, over time, we will see a movement where we start being recipients of welfare from municipalities and the state to then become working aged ourselves and pay back for what we have received and pay ahead to what we're going to receive at a later point in stage time. So it means that there is a contract between generations, an intergenerational contract that demands two things. One thing is that those of working age actually do work, okay? This is what I'm going to focus on today. The other aspect is reproduction, that those who are fertile age actually get as many kids as they are themselves. This is the big issue that is facing all European countries, that the 68 generation, they were preaching that we should make babies and not war, but they did not do it, okay? So therefore we're seeing big generations retiring at the same time as we see smaller generations entering the period of their life where they are of working age. So this is, in other words, the secret mechanism behind the Nordic model to enable as many people to work as possible and also to enable as many people to get the number of kids they want. Are we successful? Yes and no. Women in the Nordic countries, they want 2.4 children in average. They don't get 2.4 children in average. They get about 1.8, 1.9, depending on what Nordic countries you're talking about. So we're lagging a little bit behind in actually enabling people to realize their welfare in terms of getting the kids as they want. We're doing better with regard to employment. So, as you can see here, Nordic men are not particular at all, okay? We don't work more or less than other men in Europe. But our women, they work more on average than women are on the labor market in other countries, because women can also be working hard, but they're not on the labor market. So in other words, we have an entry of women into the labor market to a large extent in the Nordic countries than elsewhere. And you can see, who is it that is Norwegian women here that are currently in the lead, okay? So we have a little competition, but Norway is leading, Sweden is just behind, and I'm afraid that Denmark and Finland is lagging behind. Now this is for women in general. Another figure I could have shown you would be that of mothers, okay? Women with small children. There you will, in a lot of European countries, see that there's an M shape, that people finish their education, enter the labor market, then they get kids, they leave the labor market, and then after some time they come back again to the labor market, and then they retire. That's the M shape. You also have it in Asian countries. In the Nordic countries, you don't have that M shape. You see people leaving the labor market, women leaving the labor market, and then they stay in the labor market, and then they retire. One of the reasons why I'm not showing this to you is because the statistical agencies of the Nordic countries have not used that statistics for years, okay? So it's only Eurostat that does it, and that's not a very reliable source. Because it's expected that everybody, also mothers, are in the working part of society. So this is the secret of the Nordic model, that we have enabled women to realize their wish to participate in the labor market by providing childcare. We are also pushing them, but we also know that they actually want it, they want emancipation, and we have cues on the childcare institutions showing that there is a demand for getting into the labor market. The dotted line here is the target of the EU 2020 strategy. I was very happy to hear Mr. Langaitis say that you have a Lithuania 2030 strategy. That sounds like a 10-year better strategy than all European countries that are at the moment running after this EU 2020 strategy, which is to increase employment of the whole population to 75% in the area, in this area of the strategy. So, to boil it down, if we look at this part that deals with labor market policies, the vision of the Nordic welfare model is to maximize life chances for all, to allow people to take education, get into work, get the number of kids they want. It's also the ambition to increase equality, so not let the inequalities we are born with from start, we don't decide who are our parents, when we are born and where we are born, even though these has big implications for our lives. So it's also about increasing equality, and then it's about increasing employment. We want people to work very much because we think it's good for you, okay? That's behind it, okay? We actually think that welfare is good. Sorry, that employment is welfare, so in itself it is good. If we are to achieve that, we actually also need high employment, okay? Without high employment, we don't have a lot of taxes coming in to finance this welfare surplus. So extensive policies that are oriented towards getting people into work is the whole idea of the Nordic model. So let me now go down in the small section of the many policy areas we have at our disposal, namely those of labor market policies. So here, the purpose is twofold. One is to maximize employment, and the second one is to do some policing to minimize abuse of the system, to avoid that there are free riders. We have two parts of the system. One we call passive and the other one we call active. I don't know if they are good labels because there are elements of active stuff in the passive part and vice versa, but for this purpose, I think we can live with it. So the passive part is about providing people with means of income that they can live off while they are in between jobs. People to help them get jobs faster and better jobs than they would otherwise have gotten. it is to raise their qualifications so that they meet the demand of the labor market, and it is finally to motivate people. And then, this will be the main point of tonight, the whole issue is how you combine the two, okay? How you make one conditioned on the other one. So how you make receipt of passive benefits conditioned on actually being available, willing to participate in the labor market. So let me briefly touch upon these two areas, active labor market policies first, and then afterwards passive labor market policies. So with regard to active labor market policies, we have a number of instruments we can turn on. Some are rights and obligations and sanctions. So in the 1990s, Denmark was spearheading a wave of labor market policy reforms throughout Europe that went in and said people not only have rights to unemployment insurance and social assistance, they also have obligations, okay? So all countries started to increase the obligations people have to search for work, to take up work. In geographical terms, further away, occupational terms in more branches, economic terms perhaps not even in the wage level that you had before. And if people refused to take on these offers, then there were sanctions. People could lose the benefits, okay? So this is one line of instruments. Another one is what we had before under service, namely supervision, matching, and exchange. Sometimes it's public exchange services, but it can also be private. Then we have training and education that deals with the up-qualification of the labor force. And then we have job subsidies to make the unemployed person more attractive to employers by putting some money as a tag onto the person. These are the 4 domains of active labor market policies. But you will find many, many, many more different policy schemes because we often distinguish between different areas, occupation and branches, often between different socioeconomic groups. Perhaps we want to make ethnic minorities more attractive or elderly people more attractive. We want to be more hard on the young people. For some reason, that seems to be the sport in a lot of countries. We may have geographical concerns, and we also have different purposes. So sometimes we want to help people be entrepreneurs starting up their business. Other times it's re-entering into the labor market, and sometimes it's rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is one of the big buzzwords that is coming up now. So there are only 4 types of instruments, but when you start combining it with all these finer distinctions, you see an explosion of number of schemes. What are the effects of active labor market policies? I don't know if you've seen Despicable Me with the Minions. So you have program effects, okay? Program effects is when you increase the qualifications of people. It can be soft qualifications like getting up in the morning and looking decent when you go for a job interview. It can also be learning how to drive a truck, do a PC. That was the keywords in the 1990s. Or it can be even more skilled type of things that you are learning. These are program effects. That means you can better come in and match the demand of labor. Then we have retention effects, okay? That's when you are actually liking the activation offer you're getting so much that you don't want to get a real job, okay? I'm enjoying myself in this training offer I'm having. I want to be there and drive truck for the next 7 weeks, even though they're offering me a job down in the corner shop or something. We don't want too many of these people. And then we have what we call motivational effects. These are people who do not like the activation offer they're getting. The biggest effect of active labor market policies is to deter people from taking up unemployment insurance and social assistance, okay? Some call this the deterrence effect. Everybody who can find a work by themselves will do it if they're faced with a really silly activation offer. This is a big effect of active labor market policies. Often it's being sold under program effects, but in reality, it's down here we see the real effects. And the last effect that we have just realized, because we are not working from a blueprint, oh, we have this model, let's go and build it. We are finding out step by step from our mistakes how we can improve things. And one of the things we are discussing in the moment is whether we have sorting effects, that people who are already in jobs look at the active labor market policies and think, Jesus, I don't want to end up there. I better hold on to my job as it is for a little bit longer, because if I don't, I will be faced with these activations offers that I do not like. So we have done lots of empirical studies on all these different types of effects, except the sorting effect. Here we still lack a bit of knowledge. So let me just give a glimpse of the evaluations. So active labor market policies are targeted at very different groups. They can be very differently construed. So not surprisingly, they also give very different effects. Here we have the one about qualifications from participating in a program, namely education. This is the Economic Council in Denmark that has made a study of how does education work in good economic times and in bad economic times. And surprise, surprise, it matters a lot whether it is one or the other type of period. So remember that when you are designing your policies, how the economic climate is out there. So what we saw is that education is helpful in bringing down the total number of unemployment benefit periods. But what we also see, this is the key figure, is that if you give education in economic good times, then people are also able to use this education up-qualifying element to actually get a work. And the average unemployment benefit period is reduced by 10 weeks. However, if you give them educational offers during an economic bad time, they cannot find a job when they have finished, and therefore you extend the total period with 7 weeks. So this is just to sort of add to the complexity of different instruments, different target groups, that we also have to look at the economic climate. Another thing that you may want to consider is that it costs money. Simply as that. So labor market policies are expensive. You may argue. You can see Lithuania as the top one, then you have the average for the EU 27. And the service part of the expenditure, sometimes called public exchange services, are blue. Active labor market policies are red. And the yellow ones are the passive support we talked about earlier. The data comes from Eurostat, and it's expressed as a percentage of GDP. And as you can see, my country has probably a world record, actually, in spending money on active, on labor market policies, active combined with passive. So you have invited the right one if you want to know something about labor market policies. At least we have a lot of it. And you can see that Sweden and Finland have much less, even though that their share of activation is pretty big, especially in Finland. This is from 2011, and of course it partly reflects that I have to admit that Sweden are doing a little bit better than Denmark in the moment, meaning that they have lower unemployment than we do, and therefore, of course, also fewer money going to support the unemployed and fewer money going into activation, whereas our expenditures are going up year by year on both these accounts. So yes, it's expensive, but remember that we have this motivation effect, that doing the red thing reduces the yellow part of the picture here. And you may also consider, what is the alternative to this? What do we do with people who cannot support themselves if we're not giving them money? Where can they then turn to? Well, they can turn to the family. This is what we're seeing on a large scale in Southern European countries, where we see people, paying for their sister, their brother who are out of work, so that they can stay above sea level. In some other countries, you do not have neither strong social support or strong social security, like the US. then you can enter into the informal labor market, as we also heard before, or you can enter into illegal sort of activities. So in the States, we have by far the biggest incarceration rate, so how many people are in prison per 100,000 people, namely 716 people. And here we know from our sociological colleagues that man is a social animal, that we learn wherever we are. So when you're in a prison, you learn how to become a good criminal. That helps explain why older people are not caught so often, because they've become better. We can see that Russia is also pretty high on the list, and to my surprise, you also look like you have a high incarceration rate, probably for reasons you know much better than I do. Whereas the Nordic countries have relatively low levels. Greenland, which is a little bit part of Denmark still, I guess, also has extremely high incarceration rates. So it's also a question of culture and your access to weapons and all sorts of things. So the simple point is that, well, if you don't give people money to live off and learn them stuff, for example, through active labor market policies, they will find money, they will learn stuff, and then you can consider yourself whether paying taxes for the active labor market policies gives you more personal security than living in a country here where you are then instead financing the penal system. Passive policies, the second part of the coin. There are many different benefits that people can get when they are not in work. Here are some of them. Unemployment insurance, social assistance, disability benefits, early exit benefits, study grants, So we are all getting, at one stage or another, some money from the state when we are not in work. Unemployment insurance is voluntary in Sweden and Denmark, whereas it's compulsory in Finland and Norway. Often you hear that benefits are generous in the Nordic countries. Is that true? Well, let's see. This is a really bad slide. This is the worst slide there. As you can see, it goes down, okay? So out here we have a person earning twice as much as the average worker, and down on the other end we have a person earning only half as much. And you can see all the countries, they are the lines, are going like this. In other words, that you get a bigger share of your former earnings if you have a low income than if you have a high income. And in there you have the Nordic countries and Germany and the Netherlands. What you cannot see is that Nordic countries don't differ a lot, okay? They all follow the same profile, giving more money to those of low income and less money to those of high incomes. Another picture will come up in a second. Robin Hood is the personalization of social assistance. In other words, the help we give to those who are not having any other means. And here, on paper at least, the idea is that you should give money enough to people to live in a normal way in society. But you should not do it too long, okay? So the role of social assistance should not be of any major size. It should have a marginal role. There should be a small group of claimants, and these claimants should only be there for short periods of time, so you'll see a lot of change of the group of social assistance claimants. This is what the ideal typical picture of the Nordic countries look like. In reality, we do have some people who are stuck in this situation on social assistance. And this is, of course, a major problem that the Nordic countries are trying to tackle. And it's particularly troublesome if, this is the case unfortunately, that some of those who are there for a long time also have kids, because then the parents are bad role models for their offsprings. Here you see the safety net. There's one mistake in this picture. It's the man, he has a nice suit on and he has a briefcase, okay? He's very unlikely to fall into the safety net. So unemployment is concentrated among people with low skills, low income and so on. They get much more unemployed than other groups, okay? And the other groups, they have nice schemes, golden handshakes, what have you, to help them. But in principle, we have social assistance forming the safety net that is going to catch people. The criticism of social assistance is, of course, that, well, it's quite comfy, actually, to be lying in this social safety net. It's so comfy that some see it as a hammock, that it takes away private initiative. It makes people prefer leisure with social assistance over working with wages. So there's a big discussion always about whether that is a trade-off to be made here. This is a slide of youth. So I'm trying to tick off all these issues I was asked to, to touch upon. So youth is the group in society that is most affected by the economic crisis that is in Europe at the moment. As you can see, we are using now a new indicator, not the youth unemployment rate, but we are using the need rates because they are a better measure of what bigger share of your youth generation are not doing something meaningful, being training, being work, being education, these three things. So you can have a high youth unemployment even though it's not a problem because it's only out of those who are in the labor force. So here you can see it's from 15 to 24, so it's a pretty young group. And that helps explain why the rates are so low. So it ranges between 5 to 8.6% in Finland. How many are not in employment, education, or training, compared to an EU 28 average of 13.1. So in other words, there are some countries in Europe where there's a huge problem of need. And you can see that the German economy is showing its strength again by having a level of only 7%. So one of the important things about activation policies is that you can help redistribute unemployment, okay? The important point here is that it's not the same who are in these adverse situations, because the longer you are in an adverse situation, the more difficult it is for you to get back into the labor market. So therefore, for youth, it's particularly important because if we don't get them a place in the labor market, then they are lost for a very long period. It has huge economic cost for the individual, and it also means that the sustainability of the future European social model is deteriorated because they're likely to earn less money and therefore pay less taxes and social contributions. And now the clue, linking the two. So down here you see the duration of unemployment. So we start being unemployed to the left, and then when we come to the right, we've been there for a very long time. And on the other side, you have the intensity of activation or workfare, whatever we want to call it. In the start, we don't want to touch people, okay? Most people can figure out how to find a job by themselves, so we would have very huge deadweight costs if we started to activate everybody. So only after a certain period of time, we will contact people, help them to search for jobs. Then we will ask them to go into short programs. This is very much the motivation factor, you know. People don't like to be asked to do things if they can find something themselves. And then we are left with those who are the heavy ones, you know, who really have problems, who cannot find a job by themselves. And for those, we come in with targeted programs. To show it in another way, this will differ between the Nordic countries, but in the start, you'll have often a period of unemployment insurance where you'll be on a relatively high level if you had a low wage. And those are the ones that are mostly unemployed. Those are the blue here. Then after a while, you will drop down to the level of social assistance. If you have a high wage, I have a high wage. I cannot be fired, and I have a high wage, and I'm not insured for unemployment, okay? Because I wouldn't get very much if I got unemployed. And even if you have an average wage, you would only get about 60% of your previous earnings, and therefore you would be bound to try to find a work by yourself. Now, after a while, you would then reach this lower level of social assistance. So the clue is that we link this with activation to make sure that people are not lying in the hammock. We come in with all these activation offers, and we increase them in intensity. So in the start, we are pretty lax with people and help them, and in the end, we're pretty tough with people, asking them to do a lot of things most of the time. So, is it true what an American economist said back in 1975, that there's a trade-off between efficiency and equity? Is it so that if we pool our money by paying contributions and taxes, that we then lose out? He compared it to a bucket, saying that there were big costs of pooling money, and symbolized these with holes in the bucket. In 1981 it was, there was a Swede responding to this, and he said, dear Mr. Okun, you have not understood the whole idea of this model. It is not a bucket with holes in it. It is an irrigation system. It is an irrigation system that is watering the economy. So he tried to portray it as a system where these unemployment benefits enables people to participate in work and to be ready to take on work later on when it was available. So in other words, mostly we have neoclassical economists saying that there's a negative trade-off between equality and efficiency. But from a Scandinavian perspective, we say yes, there is a risk that we have a negative trade-off, but we actually know how to deal with it. We have different instruments. We provide people with insurance so that they take an education, do all sorts of risk-prone things so that they can get a good job in the labor market. We invest in people from their small children until they get old. And then we have these activation policies working as sticks, as a way of policing moral hazard, avoiding people to stay in the hammock. And then as a macroeconomic policy instrument, these cash benefits also works as automatic stabilizer. So in other words, yes, you neoclassical economist, you may be right, but we have actually found solutions of how to avoid social security transfers to those out of work becoming inefficient. So to sum up, I have 6 slides, and I think a couple of them are pretty fast. So what have we learned? We have learned that people actually do respond to economic incentives, in particular the young people, okay? So we have a couple of times reduced benefits for young considerably, and this has helped reduce unemployment among youth. But it was at a period of time when the economy was doing well. Doing the same thing today wouldn't get the same effects. Activation, we have found out that yes, it does sometimes enable people to do other things, but even more important perhaps is this motivational effect that we were talking about earlier. Subsidized jobs, sometimes they do work as a stepping stone into the labor market. If you see the labor market as a fortress, then we try to open up the gates so that people can come from outside and go into the fortress, okay? But what happens if you open up a gate in a fortress? People can also walk out of the fortress, okay? So a lot of the schemes that we made for people to use them as stepping stones getting into the labor market are actually being used from people in the labor market to get a more peripheral connection to the labor market. So one should be very careful about how we design this. Rehabilitation is like a buzzword, as I said. This is used in active labor market policies, but it's also used in a number of other areas, disability, family policies, active aging, a lot of different things, just as prevention is also on the rise. But I was not allowed to speak about this, so I'll just mention it and we can perhaps discuss it. So, in general, there are small effects on unemployment directly, depending on the target group and the economic cycle. The motivational effects are very important. Countries keep a Nordic model. Well, in the future, because of aging populations, it will be even more crucial to have high employment rates. It's very important to avoid this marginalization of people from the labor market. We are seeing new challenges facing Europe. I hope we will find time to discuss them. But they deal with gender, age, persons with handicap and illness, ethnicity, regional, and so on. Where youth, men, mental ill, ethnic minorities, and people on the outskirts of countries, those are the ones that are the most weak groups in the future compared to earlier. Women, elderly, persons with physical handicaps, tore down, and people with less skills. So there are new challenges, but we know that we have some instruments that we have used with some success for the old ones, so it looks like that they can also be used for the new ones. So some of the keywords when you want to reform your labor market policies are mentioned up here. Integrated, meaning that the schemes come together in meaningful ways. Preventing social ills from occurring, example, sickness or unemployment or whatever. enabling, that you enable those who are in a situation to come back on their feet, activating, that they're not allowed to lie in the hammock, holistic, that you think in bigger terms, so it's both health, social, and other areas coming together, that you're not afraid of policing, that you see things as developing over time and not at a static point in time, and then that you look out for win-win solution when it will be good both for the persons in charge and for other wider aims. So, in your EU 2030 strategy, I'm not from Sweden where the IKEA is. I saw on my way back in here yesterday that you have a huge IKEA just by the airport. I'm one of the few persons who cannot understand these instruction leaflets in IKEA. And I am sure that I have given you some ideas, but how you're going to make that construction of you for EU 2030, I don't know. But I wish you all the best of luck. And I do think that on the most general level, these are some of the points that you may want to carry with you home from tonight. Namely that labor market policies is only part of the picture, that you also have to think in wider terms, and you have to be careful or think about who you are targeting with your programs, and that it's not always working because of the economy, and that it's not only because it's good for people, it's also because it's bad for people, okay? So in the Nordic countries, we don't do it for the blue eyes, we also do it because we are after people, we're not naive. So I guess that was what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. We'll have three commentators who will either comment the key presentation or will present a different view of things. And let me invite the first one of them, Executive Director of Investors Forum, Mrs. Rūta Skyrienė. And she will be followed afterwards by Professor in Economics Faculty at Pažangos University, Romas Lazutka, and Director of Research in the Public Policy and Management Institute, Dr. Egidijus Barcevičius. You have a presentation in Latin, the support function.
Ar yra mano prezentacija? Aš nematau bėkinti.
I'll be the support function then.
Darbo galiu pasiimti akinius. I need glasses. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I'm not a specialist of active labor market policies, instruments, and it's quite difficult for me to comment. Just a few comments on your presentation. You said job secured. What does it mean? Who is securing job? Government? Employer? Labor regulations? I don't know. And Robin Hood, very good example. But I believe that state is a Robin Hood in both ways. In Nordic countries and in Lithuania as well, because they are collecting taxes and a lot. So I believe that effectiveness of state management is very important in all policies. If to look into numbers, what we are, how much we are financing active market, labor market policy instruments or other social security policies, looks like not very big number if to compare to GDP, but first of all we have to look how effective they're using. We locals, we understand how many people are maybe not qualified to get state support or state assistance, but they are getting because they are cheating. And there is not enough control. So that means that policies must be also more strong in Lithuania. So I will talk a little bit more about what I know better than active labor market policies. First of all, a little bit who we are. Investors Forum is an association of foreign investors in Lithuania, so that means that our members are most multinational companies, and it's a big employers. We are employing more than 26,000 people, and just to compare that, we are 53 now, and we paid 12% of consolidated state and social security budgets. 12%, 53 companies. And when I looked into numbers, how much our members have paid social security per employee, so we got that we paid twice more than average in Lithuania. So that means, are we only very good employers, or we are transparent and paying all taxes? I will not talk more about ourselves, because audience probably, I believe, knows it. I looked into topic and I was thinking, are we ready for flexicurity? Our environment is ready for this. And already was mentioned that we have quite high shadow economy, and what is more scary, that our society is tolerating very much. We are very happy not to pay in cash and not to pay VAT. We are very happy to buy smuggled cigarettes or alcohol, and that is the biggest problem. Some 60% of people would buy, not legally sold products. Second one is unemployment is high and becoming structural. If before crisis we had unemployment around 4%, and it was called structural, now we have double-digit number, and it's becoming structural, because employers are telling that they don't find right people, and very often some people coming from labor exchange and asking, can you sign me the paper that I am not the guy you are looking for, in order to go back to the labor market and to ask again benefits from the government, because he probably has some shadow employment where he is getting cash as well. And that is also very much related to labor regulations, because it's over-regulated. There is such a high level of requirements established in labor code that employers, our members are they all are socially responsible companies, and they say that they don't have limit where they can do any instruments to show how good employer they are. So, and I'm very pessimistic, because there is no political will to liberalize labor regulations. Ex-Prime Minister is sitting in first row. They didn't. What we believe that they will. New government probably will not also. They presented very tiny changes, refusing, I believe that Nordic people won't understand. They're abolishing requirement to register labor employment contract into register book, which is heavy book, not to register in computer systems, but to register in book by signing employer and employee. And this is very big event. We will have more flexible labor regulations. Very high per employee. Employer pays more than 30% social security contribution. And it's like social security, but actually this is social taxes because it's percentage, and there is no cap on it. You pay from all your salary. Few years ago, not a few, probably 5 or 6 years ago, Deloitte has calculated how much it would cost for employer to employ very talented Japanese guy in each European Union country, and to pay him 150,000 euros per year, how much it would cost for employer. So Denmark is very cheap country. For employer is much, I don't remember now exact numbers, but Lithuania was among 5. France, Lithuania, some others. So that shows, we say that our labor costs are very low because our salaries are low. But labor costs for employer for high quality jobs are very high. And you're right, flexicurity understood that it is very expensive. But I believe if to use funds effectively, it could be done something. We have not, I don't know how to say, we have labor unions uniting some 10% of employees. They are not very popular because they are very old-fashioned, Soviet type, and they are against anything. They are against also abolishing those books. They don't understand. They don't like it. Anything what goes to make it easier for employer is bad, and you cannot negotiate with them. They don't believe that if we will liberalize labor code, we will introduce more flexicurity system into that compensation schemes and others. So this is why I'm so pessimistic. We don't have dialogue with them. It is very difficult. And governments, of course, they are also afraid of their attacks. And it's not popular. And any movement towards liberalization is treated as slavery coming into Lithuania. And that social security and state support system is not affecting that for sure. We have members in regions, not in Vilnius, but in regions where they are looking for some not very high quality personnel, and they labor exchange sending, for example, 20 employees wanted to employ and sending 20 employees in Naujoje Akmenė. They got offer more than minimum salary. It's 1,200 litas after taxes, and they didn't get anyone. No one wanted. Everybody asked, can you pay a little bit in shadow? Because if you will pay all that salary, I will not receive state support for heating compensation and for children. So all that system is bad. So if we want to introduce flexicurity, we have to change everything. And so this is why so pessimistic note I have today. I don't think that will be easy to change all mentality. It will take years. And this is really, as you mentioned, it's really what is in the future is a big risk, that we are getting new generation which also will be not able and will have no intentions to work because they see the same in their families. I'm not going to talk about flexicurity because I believe all audience knows about it. I just made the slides about it. So we have to liberalize relations, labor regulations, and of course to look very carefully to all social assistance, social security, social support, social aid, how to call all that support system and support instruments. This slide, I just put a few slides about the survey we did with our members. This is time to spend to employ. This is about those registers. On average, to employ new employee, how it taking time. So you can see that it can be 1 hour. That means to register in all books, to sign, and so on. For some companies, I don't know why, it was up to 3 days. That is, of course, we are happy that now government made decision and it will be abolished all those stupid, old-fashioned requirements, because that is really needed. On legal termination, our members said that the biggest problem they are facing was priority right to retain the job. Because we employers are also acting as social institutions. You cannot ask people who have children until 14 years old. You have to inform them 4 months in advance, so they are losing motivation to work 4 months in advance when you are dismissing. But what if I have 3 children, 15, 16, 17, so what, you can kick me out? It's a lot of such not reasonable requirements and all those priority rights. They are also limiting possibility for those people to be employed. Because everybody will be look, okay, he has children, no, I don't want him, I will take who has no children or who has older children. So overtime work also regulated, over-regulated. We have limit on daytime. If European directive for labor work time says that regulations only on the week, we have per day. If I am asking my employer, can I take Friday day off and I will stay long in my office? If my employer is following regulations, he will say, no, why I have to pay you overtime? Because he cannot do that. So that flexibility also needed for employees as well. So I don't want to talk anymore about it because I think everybody knows and we used those slides. It's just for demonstration. So maybe it will be from my side.
Thank you. All right. Professor, maybe you want to react to any research, so just keep on moving. All right. Then the next commentator.
For inviting to make some comments on Professor Jonas Kvistas' presentation, and I like it very much because of this rather wide context that was presented talking about labor market policy, and I am trying to do in the similar way. I will start from the main features of social welfare regime in Lithuania and move a little bit further to the labor market policy as well. There are 3 sources for understanding of Lithuanian social welfare and labor market policy specifically, and no one from Kingdom of Denmark. We can see some elements from German social welfare model or Bismarckian, some heritage from Soviet type welfare regime, and also from liberal model, because we started our reforms during the globalization and spread of ideas of new liberalism 20 years ago. So my main factors of social welfare regime development in Lithuania, they are from the period of before Second World War. Lithuania was not an industrial country, and we had not developed social welfare at that time. However, some elements from social insurance from Germany came, especially in the form of sickness funds. They were created before Second World War, but later on, of course, social protection was developed under Soviet rules, and in the context of market economy and political democracy. Of course, we have still some good heritage from that time, like high rate of participation, women participation in the labor market, also universal education and universal education and health policy. Rise of global neoliberalism during the period of reconstruction, our social welfare also made some impact. So we have still some positive and negative elements from each model, and to be Lithuanian, I will maybe escape this positive side, but will concentrate more on negatives. And in this way, we will see that we have rather complicated system for labor market policy. So we have certain heritage from Soviet time, and maybe main of them. There is still problem with rule of law on the level of companies. We heard from the former presentation about problems faced by employers in the labor market when they are trying to take people, or if they would like to change them. And we can see that most employed people left jobs on their own request, even during the economic crisis. This means that they are not so well protected by the law. Of course, there are laws and there are regulations, but not everybody following these rules. Another problem with trade unions, participation is very low, and trade unions are inactive, and we of course know that labor market is not a market of perfect competition, and trade unions or government have to do some for better functioning of labor market. If we have not active trade unions, we cannot achieve certain agreement or social contract about wages and labor market policy as well. Formally, Bismarck and social insurance and formal social partnership is rare, and we have contributory social benefits. They are dominant, but contributions are heavy on the one hand, and the social benefits are poor. Of course, mainly because of low earnings and also because of tax evasion. And there are no collective bargaining on wages. talking about new liberalism and globalization, maybe we have see the main ideas in the society. They are related to this Reagan's phrase that government is not the solution of our problem, but government is the problem, and rather similar phrase that rising tide lifts all boats, and this means that we should concentrate only on the macroeconomic policy, and if we solve macroeconomic problems, and this should help for social policy, and even maybe will solve all problems, and we don't need so strong labor market policy and social policy as well. So, based on this, I would like to say that there is no way to follow Nordic model because of mix of three, Bismarck and Soviet, and no liberal approaches in our social welfare system. What are main outputs of outcomes of this mix? The first one, very low compensations of wage of employees. In gross domestic product, we have only about 40%, and this means that wages are very low. And of course, it depends how we calculate costs of wages or costs of labor. If we calculate only part paid by employees to social security, of course it is rather high rate. But if we put all together, and if we look to the GDP and structure of the GDP according to the incomes, we see that the part of workers is very low, and it is important also for tax collection. We are behind about 50 years of Denmark according to tax revenue. Of course, we are not so far behind if we look on our economic development. If we calculate our GDP per capita, and if we assume that Denmark was growing, especially after Second World War, rather fast, we may be behind 20 or 25 years according to our economic development, but we much far behind according to our public revenues. And of course, we cannot finance social welfare and labor market policy. The problem is that we allocate very few resources, and we saw this on the screen made by pictures by Professor Kvist. If you look how many participants, employed people participating in labor market policy measures, 10 times less in Lithuania if compared to Denmark. But also passive labor market policy undeveloped in Lithuania as well. Sometimes seems that we still have certain attitude to the employed people as they are lack of motivation, and it's major problem and major employment. Too little attention is paid on employment as a structural problem of economic and labor market development. And because of that, we allocate very few resources also on passive labor market policy, on employment benefits. Only about 15–20% of employed people receive employment benefits because there are a lot of restrictions. And if we compare with another countries, replacement rate of employment benefit for those who receive average wage in Lithuania about 40%, and we have lowest rate. Also, if we look to the duration of maximum duration of employment benefit in months, also Lithuania pays about 6–8 months, and later on people should apply to social assistance, but they don't receive social security benefits from employment insurance. Safety net is working, and I think that it's working very well in Lithuania. If during the economic crisis, number of recipients is growing very fast. Of course, people should apply for social benefit, and many of them receive this benefit because there are almost alternative sources of income. If they have not a job, or if they have only one employed person in family, there is almost no family support. Number of employed people receiving employment benefit also is very, very low. This means that safety net is taking a very heavy burden, and number of people who receiving these benefits is growing during the economic crisis, and this helps people. But there are some decisions to destroy the system, just to give for municipalities, and municipalities will have now this right to use this money for another purpose. Of course, they will relocate some of this money, and less people will receive those benefits. But of course, we will have certain outcomes as well. If you look to the early retirement, of course, everyone knows that it is a problem with aging society, and one of the main goals is to keep people in employment as long as possible. But if people have not another opportunity, have not another income, they use this early retirement scheme. And during the economic crisis, we see that the number of those people increase 2 times. If they cannot receive employment benefit, or if they cannot receive social assistance, or it's rather complicated, of course they should go to the Social Security Fund and to ask for their early retirement pension. So we have to pay for this. And in conclusion, I would like to say just that despite of complicated history, Lithuania has developed some kind of hybrid welfare regime. New and new politicians, they are trying to learn this regime in making some reforms, so they are learning in doing. And labor market policy in Lithuania is a phenomenon of the future, I think, and let's be optimistic, maybe we will create this. Thank you.
And I would like to invite Egidijus Barcevičius for the first comment.
afternoon, everyone. Okay, so I'm actually the only guy here without a PPT presentation.
But also probably the only one who's going to be on time.
Well, of course, I'll try. And so, yeah, so I hope that you'll be able to follow me even without this presentation. And well, thank you, Professor, for a very nice presentation, very visual one. I will never look at the bumblebee the same way again. Indeed, well, many thoughts just listening to the presentation, as well as actually listening to the two comments before me, because well, what we've seen is that we saw two very interesting comments before me from very different normative perspectives. But what's also very interesting is that actually the two commentators agreed on two things. So first of all, it's really difficult. It will be very difficult for Lithuania to follow or to reach the Nordic model. But another, I would say, also very interesting thing is that both commentators agreed that Nordic model is good. So it seems that for us in Lithuania, really, Nordic, I mean, can mean very different things, and everyone kind of fills in the contents based on his or her values. Well, I guess I'm not going to comment too much whether Nordic model is achievable. Well, I guess we had very interesting discussion during previous events of this series, and actually a lot of preconditions related to achieving the Nordic model. We spoke about trust. We said that trust perhaps is the key thing, because I mean, without trust, you don't really make people to pay taxes. Without trust, it means that you don't have money to pay for active labor market policies, for social policies and things like that. So then the question is how to achieve trust, and we actually find out or kind of generated some ideas what could be done in Lithuania with regard to that. But I will concentrate in my comments on a few rather or smaller things, so to say, not as fundamental as trust. The first thing is actually that, after listening to the presentation by Professor Kvist, I think I will also not look at the term motivation the same way again. Because really, when you think about it, I mean, I really found this interesting, very intriguing. Active labor market policies, as thing which motivates people not actually get off work, not actually go on benefits, because these active market policies, they are so active, perhaps a bit too intrusive, so that people don't really want to go through the whole process. And I was kind of also thinking whether we can apply this to the Lithuanian context as well. And that's a tricky question, because I guess, well, from our perspective, we do have a group of people who would never go to the labor exchange. I mean, even if you get unemployed, well, you don't really think of yourself as, going to labor exchange, asking for unemployment benefit, which is not that big anyway. But you just, go on, look for a job, apply for a job, well, go to another foreign country, migrate, so to say. So there is a category of people which I don't know whether this category of people actually considers, activation, hazards of activation, all the more so that there is not too much going on in terms of, or there's not too much coverage in terms of activation in Lithuania. But still, labor exchange for some people doesn't really have a very good image. But for other people, actually we're quite dependent on all kinds of assistance, including unemployment benefits, social benefits, everything like that. And of course, from their perspective, the more they get, the better. And this leads to my second point, which is also in a way a reaction to one interesting thing in the presentation by Professor Kvist. Well, what you said is that, well, of course we do differentiate between active and passive labor market policies. But in the passive policies, there is an active element. You want to actually help people, or you want to make people to think about work and go to work as soon as possible. But actually there is another phenomenon which I will try to comment from Lithuanian perspective. This is a passive element in active labor market policies. So even if we don't have, or we don't spend too much on active labor market policies, we still spend, and the amount of money involved is, well, at least from the Lithuanian perspective, is also quite considerable. But there is one interesting thing, or one interesting twist to the story. I mean, imagine you are in a country like Lithuania, and your unemployment level increases from 6% in 2008 to 18% in 2010. Right? Your budgetary balance deteriorates. It's, your budget deficit is something like 9% in 2009. And you have to do something about your public finances. What do you do? What do you finance? Do you go firstly with passive labor market measures or active labor market measures? And of course, you go firstly with passive labor market measures because you are obliged basically to do so by law. So how do you finance active labor market measures in that context? Well, and in our context, in Lithuania, the answer is European Social Fund. So basically what we've done, we kind of specialized. National money, national funds go to the passive measures, and active labor market measures more or less get financed through the European Social Fund. But when, the story, there are more twists or more dynamics in this story. Because indeed, when you look at how money was allocated, ESF money, how it was allocated, so there is one twist that actually we did quite a lot of reallocation between different measures of European Social Fund. For example, we reallocated a lot of money, well, in a crisis context it's all too natural, so we reallocated a lot of money from enterprise training to what we call labor market measures. And labor market measures is of course a proxy word for the unemployed. And in that context, so what did we do with the unemployed? What kind of active labor market measures we financed? If you look at the number, during the whole current period of structural funds from 2007 up to 2013, we are going to, well, about 40,000 unemployed people will undergo training, all kinds of training. So it's 40,000, it's quite a lot, but we are talking about 7 years here. But 160,000 people will receive subsidized employment and go into public works. So this is what I mean by a kind of a passive element. Of course, subsidized employment and public works, you can discuss. But the point is that in terms of active labor market policy mix, these are rather short-term measures, and a very, very strong element in these measures is, of course, short-term pain relief. And that's all natural. Of course, we are in crisis situation. We have to do something. But this is the context, the crisis context. But now we are getting out of crisis, and so it means that we also have to rethink a little bit what we are doing with our public policies, including our active labor market policies. So of course, we have to do some refocusing from shorter term policies to more medium and long-term policies. And this actually leads to my final point. Well, it's a pity a little bit that, you, Professor Kvist, didn't really discuss too much prevention. You didn't really discuss too much social investment, which you do in your recent article. Of course, you didn't really have too much time to cover everything. But I think when we are kind of putting together our strategies for the future, when we are putting together our operational programs, this is the bureaucratic word for when planning EU support. So when we are putting together them for 2014, 2020, things like prevention and things like social investment, well, should be high on the agenda. And prevention is, well, an interesting thing. But what do you mean by prevention, for example, in a context of active labor market policies? Well, one thing, I mean, what are you going at? What kind of things do you want to achieve? And one thing is, well, you want to do the prevention because you don't want people to go to prison. Well, another thing is that perhaps you want to do prevention because you want to prevent unemployment. And well, maybe you want to do prevention because you want that people don't get in the situation where we can't use active labor market policies. And this actually links the whole discussion about prevention to social investment. Because as you've said in your article, well, social investment is about skills formation, about skills maintenance and skills use. And the sooner you start doing that, well, the better, the higher the return. And so I will leave you just with a few numbers. I mean, we do underinvest heavily in our human resources. Our unemployment rate is not that, well, it's mediocre, but it's not high at all when you compare it with the Nordic countries. But we also have, well, you have to think about some specific target groups of a problem and also what you want to do about that. So, for example, we have in Lithuania 10,000 families which we call, in a politically correct way, social risk families. But I mean, they are really not risk families, they are really difficult families, and we have 20,000 children living in these families. We have 5,000 to 6,000 children living in institutions. And I mean, you know, these are usually, they don't really come up when you are discussing labor market policies. But this is why I like this notion of social investment. Because really, I mean, the sooner you start, the better. And well, you have to do that with quite significant segments of population. Otherwise, if you don't start doing that early, then even, well, active labor market policies will not help. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good comment. And I will ask Professor Jonas Kvistas to try to respond to the last comment as well as the comment of Mrs. Rūta Skyrienė of Investors Forum, where I can remind that she brought out bullet points that labor unions do not want to see any changes and that they are not capable to see, to understand any proposed reforms, that there is no dialogue between labor unions, employers and society, and our society yet tolerates shadow economy and needs more time to understand the value of paying taxes. And on top of that, Professor Romas Lazutka said that there is no way for Nordic welfare state due to Lithuanian heritage, yet he has a hope of some sort.
Thank you very much for summarizing the comments. That's helpful. So now it's a little bit difficult not to address those points. So I heard Rūta Skyrienė say that you still believe that we have a Robin Hood system in the Nordic countries. So perhaps I did not explain myself very well. The point is not so much that you take from the rich and give to the poor. It's you take money from yourself at one point of time, pay back what you have received, and pay ahead to yourself. So it's horizontal redistribution over the life cycle. So that's a very important point. So if we start looking at the policies that we have in place, the Economic Council has estimated that we use about 2/3 of social expenditure on horizontal redistribution and only 1/3 on the Robin Hood, you know, the vertical from the healthy to the from the healthy to those who are sick but in working age, and from the rich to the poor, and so forth. Some of you have raised the issue of effectiveness, and of course you're much better judges of whether you can create institutions that can get legitimacy and effectiveness in accruing means for financing these different types of policies. I will not be able to advise you well on this, just to say that one way of doing it is to get money at the source, you know, that you collect it regularly every month from the employer before paying out the money, so that you don't have tax collectors collecting the money later on. I think that the mortality rate among Russian tax collectors is among the most risky jobs in the world because they have to walk around once a year and try to collect the taxes, and that's of course a very smart way of doing things. You say that you have high labor regulations and that we should decrease them. The French have done the same, saying that, okay, we want flexicurity, and then they only introduce the flexibility part of it. That is, of course, not very popular. You have to do both at once, make this sort of a give and take, that you both give flexibility and then secure people when they become more vulnerable. And in this economic climate we have in the moment in Europe, most governments are only doing one and not the other, and that is part of the reason why it's not popular and why they turn angry towards the European Union as if it was them. The second commentator, Romas Lazutka, said, well, you guys, you have a mixture of all three models, so you cannot go Nordic, Here I have again not explained myself too well. We also have elements of all three. It's very important to be in the labor market in the Nordic countries, like in a Bismarckian system, in order to get benefits. On the cash side, okay? It is the service side that the Nordic model stands apart. It is on the service side that we stand in character, because that's where we are expansive. We don't have better cash benefits than they do in France, Germany, and so forth. For middle and high income earners, it's much better to live in France and Germany than in Denmark in case you get old or disabled or unemployed. It is on the service side that we are much broader in the scope and in the policies we have. And here you actually have some from your Russian inheritage service schemes that were built up, I guess, I've understood, on firms more than we are used to, but still you had a provision of services that they did not have in the Bismarckian countries at the same point in time. So you have a tradition of women being part of the labor market to a larger extent than in many of the other continental European countries that you may want to think about activating proactively in your strategies for 2020 or 30, whatever you want to make the time limit. And then the last commentator kindly took up this issue of social investments, and it is no lie at all that I'm much more positive about the outcome that you can get from investment earlier in life than on active labor market policies. I don't think that the answer to the economic crisis at all can be found in active labor market policies. It can help, but it cannot build the foundation for the future. Here I think we have to think much more in terms of social investments. And I would be very happy to come back on another occasion and give you a rundown on the many benefits that we can get from social benefits, both for employers, families, and the country as such. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And let us immediately open the floor to questions. And I think some hands are already on the rise for an hour almost. And I'll ask Mr. Jonas first the invitation.
Thank you very much, Professor, for a very interesting and vivid presentation. What was followed after, I think, was very typical Lithuanian, very, very negative, criticizing and depressed commentaries, except maybe the last one. And when you reach the phase of the discussion, what could we do and what could we implement, everybody's already too tired and too late. But maybe all commentaries, in all commentaries, there was some basic line that I think is everyone is interested in it in Lithuania, because this discussion reminds question about egg or chicken. Who was first? Is it possible to try to implement some labor market policies, or some maybe to pick up the cherries until you actually reach the side and have some other aspects of welfare model? Because from the latest IMF report, latest working paper, it is obvious that in Lithuania the income to GDP ratio in budget, in social security budget, is the lowest in the EU. So there is actually not much what to redistribute.
So is it you have probably you have then maybe to do some fiscal homeworks, to fight the corruption, the shadow economy, tax exemptions, to increase maybe some taxes on capital side but decrease on labor, and then to move forward to labor market policies. So is it possible to pick up maybe some aspects until you have some underlying problem solved? Thank you.
Right?
I'm from Ministry of Social Security and Labor. I'm responsible for labor in Lithuania. I must say that I'm happy with this presentation 3 times. First of all, I'm happy to know how many our specialists know about Lithuanian active labor market measures and policy. Now I know about that. Second, I am happy that I got some new ideas from your presentation. But I must say that 70% of Nordic countries' active labor market policy measures are making in Lithuania. So we are not in the end of Europe or in the world. And also I'm happy that the one thing that our politicians, what we can see here, knows that everything depends on money, what was spent for these measures. Like our labor exchange director sitting here, he like to say that amount of songs in evening depends of spending this evening money. So that.
You know the American author and humorist Mark Twain? So Mark Twain, he said that there are only 2 things in life that are certain: taxes and death. A Danish humorist answered Stormke. He said, well, the problem is that they occur in the wrong order. So in other words, seen from a Scandinavian perspective, life has its good sides and its bad sides, and part of life is to pay taxes. So of course that is a big thing that I guess relates to both of your points, that yes, you have to get your population, your companies, willing to pay taxes. And it is a sort of a bit of a chicken and egg, because I guess that one of the ways of persuading them that this is a good idea is by giving them policies that they like, that work for them, that create a good labor force that is skilled, that creates a good childcare where you can deliver your children and feel fine when you go to work. So these things are intermingled, and I'm not sure we can make a clear order saying, first one thing and then another thing and then another thing. But please do remember, okay, that I'm talking looking over my shoulder. It's much easier to make sense of what you have done when you look back at what you have done than when you look forward. So we are all having to try to do our best wherever we are, doing a little bit of modeling through, I think, before the political science.
Thank you. And ex-Prime Minister Egidijus question.
Yeah, Professor Reyes, thanks a lot for a very good presentation. But I'm always repeating during the very good sessions very similar questions. In Lithuania, and because of that Soviet heritage and some very popular Soviet time books, even written by Lenin, we always are repeating 2 questions: who is guilty and what to do. Usually we're stopping from the first question: who is guilty, and everybody knows the answer. For a prime minister. But really, I'm always asking, so what to do? And my question is very simple. So you have seen really the picture of Lithuania. lots of government, economy is growing, and unemployment is going down. But nevertheless, we have such a situation which we have. And of course, we want to have Nordic model, moving to the Nordic model, and everybody would like to have Danish model here in Lithuania, but the question is what to do. How to move from what we have to that development, to that level of development what you have. Should we invite Danish king to become Lithuanian king, or if to be more serious, I think that you have seen some other countries with similar situation what we have in Southern Europe, which perhaps are also trying to follow Danish example. So, and what would be your advice? How to move to that model, and how to, and from where to start, and how to achieve the same?
The question is how to move from today to Denmark.
I think this is a very difficult question, of course, as difficult as it is good. I think there are two things that we perhaps should also take into account. One is migration. I have no idea about migration in Lithuania, but I guess that if there's a lack of prospects for youth in Lithuania, then they will go elsewhere, where there are jobs to get on a larger scale. So I guess that there's a need for change. So a need is a good precondition for change. It's easier to persuade your colleagues, I guess, if there's a strong need. Another one is fertility. So a lot of countries are at the moment experiencing shrinking populations because they have fertility levels be low, reproduction levels. So if it wasn't for migration from sub-Saharan countries, we would see a lot of the South European countries disappearing over the next few years. I think it takes 3 generations and there are no more Italians, according to the Economist